State, Triumph, Harley, and the rest of them. So what Honda did, they rented a building just up the street that happened to be empty. And they had all the models on show there. So if somebody was interested in going to a motorcycle show, they could walk up the street a half a block, and there were all the Hondas in there, and the only place that you could see a Honda, because there was none in the main show place. And that's the way they approached the business, recognizing the fact that they had product to offer which nobody knew anything about, really. So one of the shows we went to, not too long a time later, was held at Laconia, during the race at Laconia, New Hampshire. And that was the year that the wild 3%ers showed up from New York and around, and they had a riot at Laconia that year. State cops and everybody showed up, and Mr. Kawashima, who was the head of American Honda Motor Company, said, if this is what racing is in the United States, Honda will not race. And so, even though we would read in the English magazines and so forth of Hondas starting to race in Europe, there was no racing in the United States, which kind of bothers me because I was running a team of G50s at the time, but the AMA barred them, so the only place I could run was to take them to Canada and run in Canada. And if any of you were in the business a long time ago, will remember that in the parts book, all the parts books, CB72 and so forth, which came later than the CB71, always in the back pages there were racing parts. That's because Mr. Honda basically was a racer. He and I got along fine, even though we didn't speak the same language. He didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Japanese. But we could communicate because our interest was the same. And that's how I got to know Mr. Honda. And he would come to the States every once in a while for a meeting of some kind or another. And being in Gardena, which I was at that time, I would get to see him. You know, no big buddy thing. You know, I wasn't a big buddy yet, but I was able to communicate with him. And that's what gets me into what I'm coming up to. So here we are, the four of us, invited to visit Japan. One of the places we visited was the R&D section. And in some of the past things, I had met a man by the name of Mr. Harada. Mr. Harada was the main engineer of the CB72, and I was invited to help test them and so forth, because they bring them the new bikes up to the United States, which is another sad story, because they would come in without paying any duty so long as they were part of the company business. And I was talking to somebody the other day, they mentioned that they watched some brand new motorcycles with a cutting torch, and they just cut them up and chopped them up and threw it on. And they jumped. And that's because they never paid duty on those machines, and they were not therefore allowed to be sold. But Mr. Harada was the head of R&D. So here I'm going and visiting R&D, and I knew Mr. Harada, who spoke fairly good English, and somewhat knew Mr. Honda. And the first thing we did, the four of us, was get a guided tour